Hidden Love, a timeless journey of unspoken feelings, silent sacrifices, and the quiet strength of a love that survived years of distance, fear, and family boundaries, only to bloom beautifully when two souls finally chose each other above all else, embracing a life together they had always dreamed of. The first time I noticed the way my heart changed around him, I was 17, and he was 22. Zhangjian had always been there, always orbiting around my world because he was my older brother's best friend, the one who practically lived at our house. He was familiar, almost like family, yet something about that particular summer shifted something deep inside me. I didn't know why my chest felt tight when he smiled at me, or why my eyes seemed to follow him without permission. He wasn't loud or attention-seeking. He was simply himself, steady, thoughtful, and quietly confident. And for reasons I could not explain, that was enough to pull me into a world I didn't yet understand. Jian had grown up with my brother, Liang. Their lives were intertwined in ways that made him feel like an extension of our family. They went to the same schools, shared secrets I was never privy to, and built dreams together about the lives they would one day lead. When I was little, I often followed them around, hoping they would let me tag along on their adventures. Jian would sometimes humor me, giving me a soft pat on the head, or sharing a sweet when my brother got irritated. Back then, he was just the older boy who treated me kindly. But that summer, when he walked into our living room wearing a crisp white shirt and carrying his usual easy smile, I felt an unfamiliar flutter that unsettled me. It was a crush, I told myself, nothing more. He was Liang's closest friend and someone who saw me as a kid sister. The idea of my feelings being anything more was foolish, so I buried them deep where no one could find them and told myself that I would grow out of it. Years passed, and I left for college in another city, creating distance that I thought would help me let go. Yet every time I came home for holidays, Jian was there helping my parents carry groceries, teasing Liang about work, and asking me how school was going. He didn't treat me differently from anyone else, but I couldn't stop the way my heart tightened whenever I heard his voice. He was always polite, always gentle, and that only made it harder. College life kept me busy, yet I would still catch myself thinking of him during quiet moments. I would remember the way his brows furrowed in concentration, or the soft chuckle he gave when my brother said something ridiculous. These small, unimportant details lived in my mind like lingering echoes. I hated how much space they took up, but I didn't know how to make them disappear. After graduation, I returned home and started working at a small publishing house. Life seemed ordinary, filled with commutes, looming deadlines, and family dinners. My brother had married by then, and Jian had been his best man, standing beside him with pride. Watching him that day had been difficult. Even though I smiled through it all, I realized then that I had to accept a painful truth. I was no longer a girl who could afford to dream aimlessly. Jian and I lived in different worlds, and my feelings had no place in reality. But Jian never truly left my life. He had become a successful architect, often traveling for projects, yet he always made time for my family. He was there when my father was hospitalized for a heart condition, handling the complicated paperwork and reassuring my anxious mother. He was there at my mother's birthday, showing up with her favorite flowers and staying to help me bake a cake. He was everywhere and nowhere at the same time, and the steadiness of his presence only deepened the ache inside me. I tried to ignore it. I threw myself into work, telling myself that I was too busy to care about love. Yet I would still find myself thinking of him late at night, wondering if he ever thought of me. He treated me with kindness, yes, but he treated everyone that way. I couldn't find any proof that his feelings for me were anything beyond the warmth of an older brother. Still, my hope refused to die. It whispered that maybe, somewhere beneath the surface, he cared for me too. One rainy evening, after a particularly exhausting day at work, I stood at a crowded bus stop, shivering under a flimsy umbrella. The wind whipped around me, and the city lights blurred through the rain. I was tired enough to wish someone would just take me home. That was when a familiar car pulled up, and Jian stepped out with his own umbrella. The sight of him stirred something deep inside me, and though he didn't say much, he guided me to his car with that quiet protectiveness he always carried. As we drove through the rain, I stole glances at him from the corner of my eye, wondering if he could hear how fast my heart was beating. I wanted to tell him everything, to finally confess the feelings I had buried for so long, but fear held me back. What if he didn't feel the same? What if my words ruined everything between us? It was easier to pretend I was simply grateful for his kindness, so I stayed silent and watched the raindrops race down the window. Life moved forward, as it always does. My brother and his wife had a child, and the family grew louder and fuller. Jian became the baby's godfather, holding the tiny infant in his arms with such tenderness that I felt my chest tighten painfully. I wondered if he would ever hold his own child like that someday, if someone else would be the reason behind his soft smile. The thought brought tears to my eyes when I was alone in my room. I didn't believe he was incapable of loving me. I just didn't believe he could. He was close to my brother and my family, and I knew he would never cross that line. And yet, hope persisted, even when logic told me to let go. Then, everything changed. My brother's company was suddenly thrown into a financial crisis, the kind that threatens to take down everything in its path. There were betrayals from trusted colleagues, mounting debts, and legal threats that left our entire family reeling. Gian, being my brother's closest friend and business partner on some projects, was drawn into the storm as well. I watched helplessly as my brother's marriage grew strained under the weight of it all, as he lost sleep and struggled to find solutions. Gian was there every step of the way, steady and composed even as the situation worsened. He worked behind the scenes to salvage what could be saved, quietly sacrificing his own time and resources. He never once complained, never once let anyone see how much he was carrying. There were nights when I cried silently, not knowing how things would turn out. It was during one of those nights that Gian came to see me. He had been at the office all day, his suit immaculate even though his eyes were tired. He didn't stay long, just long enough to reassure me that everything would be okay. When he left, I stood at the doorway and watched him disappear into the darkness, my heart aching with words I couldn't say. The crisis eventually passed, leaving scars but also forging stronger bonds between us all. My brother rebuilt his company with Gian's help, and life slowly returned to normal. But something inside me had shifted. I realized I couldn't keep living in the shadows of my own heart, waiting for a miracle that might never come. If I continued this way, I would spend my entire life watching from afar, loving silently. I spent weeks thinking about it, debating whether I had the courage to take the risk. It wasn't a dramatic decision. It was simply the quiet acknowledgement that my feelings deserved the truth, even if the truth hurt. One morning, I wrote John a letter. I poured everything into it, the years of love I had hidden, the moments I had treasured in secret, and the hope that had sustained me even when it felt impossible. I told him that I wasn't asking for anything in return. I only wanted him to understand how deeply I had loved him all this time. When I handed him the letter, I didn't stay to see his reaction. My hands were trembling as I walked away, my chest tight with both relief and dread. For days, I waited for an answer, each moment stretching into an eternity. But none came. I tried to tell myself that it was fine, that I had done what I needed to do. But the silence weighed heavily on me, filling every corner of my thoughts. And then, one evening, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened the door that evening, Zhang Jian stood there. He looked exactly the same as he always did, calm and composed, yet there was something different in his eyes. They carried a weight I hadn't seen before, as though the letter I had given him had shifted something inside of him. He didn't come inside right away. Instead, he stood there for a long moment, as if searching for the right way to begin, and then stepped into the living room, the air thick with unspoken words. I could feel my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I had spent days telling myself not to expect anything, that perhaps the silence had been his answer, and yet now he was here. He didn't hand me back the letter or tell me what he had come for immediately. He just looked at me in a way that made my knees feel weak, and in that quiet, I understood. He had read every word. He had seen me in a way he never had before. His visit that evening wasn't long, but it was enough to change everything. He told me in a steady but soft voice that he was sorry. Sorry that I had carried this burden for so many years alone, and sorry that he hadn't realized sooner what was in my heart. He admitted that he had loved me too, but had convinced himself it was wrong. Because of my brother, because of the family ties that bound us all together, he had built walls around his heart, walls he thought were necessary to protect both of us from complications. The revelation struck me like a wave. All the years I had believed my love to be one-sided suddenly reframed themselves in the light of his words. He had felt the same way, but had fought against it, believing he was doing the right thing. I wanted to cry, not just because of the relief, but because of the wasted time, the countless moments we had both suffered in silence when we could have simply been together. We didn't rush into anything after that night. It was enough, at first, to simply know that the feelings were mutual, that the years of longing had not been in vain. We took small steps, careful and deliberate, knowing that our relationship would change the dynamic of everything around us. I worried about my brother's reaction more than anything. He had always been protective of me, and Gian was more than just a friend to him. He was like a brother. The thought of causing tension between them weighed heavily on me. When we finally told Liang, I was nervous to the point of trembling. But to my surprise, he didn't react with anger or suspicion. He looked at us for a long moment and then simply nodded. Later, he confessed that he had always suspected something, that the way Jian looked at me had been different for years. He just hadn't said anything because he trusted us both to know what was best. His support was a relief I hadn't dared to hope for. With my brother's blessing, Jian and I began to truly build our relationship. At first, it felt strange to hold his hand openly, to no longer hide the affection that had been buried for so long. But soon it became natural, like breathing. We discovered new sides of each other, learning habits and quirks we had never noticed before. He was patient with me, always attuned to my emotions, and I found myself falling in love with him all over again in a deeper, steadier way. Life, however, was never without complications. Jian's work as an architect often took him to different cities, and there were weeks when we barely saw each other. The distance was difficult, and though we both tried to stay connected through phone calls and messages, there were moments when I felt the old insecurities creeping back in. What if our relationship wasn't strong enough to survive the demands of his career? What if the quiet bond we had built was not enough against the pull of the outside world? One evening, while Jian was away on a project, I attended a company event for my publishing house. There, I was introduced to a man named Wei Hao, a new author whose book we were preparing to launch. He was charming and intelligent, and though I was polite, I kept my distance. But Wei Hao seemed to take an interest in me, seeking me out during breaks and asking questions about my life. I didn't think much of it until he began showing up at the office unannounced, bringing coffee and finding reasons to talk to me. I tried to make it clear that I wasn't interested, but he was persistent. He had a way of speaking that made people feel seen, and though I didn't encourage him, I couldn't entirely avoid him either. The situation grew more complicated when Jian returned from his trip and heard rumors about Wei Hao's attention toward me. He didn't confront me immediately, but I could sense the shift in his demeanor. He was quieter, more withdrawn, as if he didn't know how to ask the questions burning in his mind. It wasn't until one late-night phone call that everything came to the surface. Jian admitted that he was worried that he wasn't around enough, that someone else might be able to offer me the kind of steady presence he couldn't. His vulnerability broke my heart because it was the exact opposite of the truth. There was no one in the world who could replace him. No one whose presence I craved the way I craved his. I reassured him as best I could, telling him that my love for him had endured years of distance and silence, and it would endure this too. The tension eased after that, but the experience reminded me how fragile love could feel, even when it was strong. I realized that a relationship wasn't simply about being in love. It was about choosing each other every single day through the uncertainties and challenges. John and I both understood that now, and it made us even more determined to hold on to what we had. As the months passed, our bond deepened. We celebrated small victories together, my brother's company stabilizing, Jian winning a prestigious design award, and me getting promoted at work. We also faced setbacks, like when my mother fell ill again and had to undergo surgery. Jian was by my side through it all, holding my hand in the hospital waiting room, reminding me that we were in this together. There were moments of quiet joy that I will never forget. Cooking dinner together in his apartment while music played softly in the background, watching the first snow of the season from the warmth of his car, and sitting side by side on the balcony as the city lights twinkled below us. These moments, simple as they were, felt like pieces of a dream I had once thought would never come true. Then came the day Jian asked me to move in with him. It wasn't a grand, dramatic gesture. It was a natural progression of the life we had already begun to share. I hesitated only because I knew how much it would change, but deep down, I wanted nothing more than to wake up beside him every day. So I said yes, and soon we were building a home together. Living with Jian was a revelation. I learned how meticulous he was about organizing the kitchen, how he had a habit of leaving his books open on the couch, and how he always remembered to water the plants even when I forgot. We argued sometimes about small things like whose turn it was to do the laundry or what color to paint the bedroom walls, but our arguments never lasted long. We had already spent too many years apart to waste time on anger. One quiet evening, as we sat on the couch together, John reached for my hand and slipped a ring onto my finger. He didn't need to say anything. The gesture alone was enough to bring tears to my eyes. It wasn't an elaborate proposal, but it was perfect for us. It was a promise that the love we had nurtured in silence for so long would now have a future. Our wedding was a small, intimate affair, attended only by close family and friends. My brother walked me down the aisle, his expression a mix of pride and nostalgia, and I couldn't help but think of how far we had all come. Gian stood at the altar waiting for me, his eyes soft and steady, and in that moment I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This was where I was meant to be. Married life brought its own challenges and joys. We learned how to balance our careers with our relationship and how to support each other through the inevitable ups and downs. There were days when we disagreed, when stress or fatigue made us short-tempered, but those moments only reminded us of how much we needed each other. Looking back now, I realize that love is not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it hides in the smallest gestures, like the way Gian always made sure I had an umbrella before leaving the house, the way he would text me just to ask if I had eaten, and the way he held my hand as though he never wanted to let go. The years we had spent apart, loving each other in silence, had shaped the foundation of what we had now. They have taught us patience, resilience, and the value of honesty. They have shown us that even when love feels impossible, it can still find a way to bloom. Our story was never about grand declarations or dramatic twists. It was about the quiet, steadfast love that grows stronger with time, the kind of love that can weather storms and still stand tall. Gian and I had found that love in each other, and though it had taken years, it was worth every moment of waiting. Sometimes I think back to that 17-year-old girl who fell in love with her brother's best friend, who kept her feelings hidden because she was afraid of what the world would say. I wish I could tell her that everything would work out, that the love she carried in her heart would not be wasted. But perhaps it was better that she didn't know. Perhaps the waiting, the yearning, and the pain of not knowing, perhaps all of it was what made our love so precious in the end. Now, as I sit on the balcony of our home, watching the sunset with Gian's arm around my shoulders, I feel a sense of completeness I once thought was impossible. We have come a long way from those days of silent longing, and I know there will still be challenges ahead. But I also know that whatever comes, we will face it together. Because this is what love is. It is not about perfect timing or flawless circumstances. It is about choosing each other, again and again, no matter what. And I will choose him for the rest of my life.